Once a month, we get together with Twin Falls County Prosecutor Grant Loebs on the show. 906, it's 53. Want to thank you for joining us. News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. And the county's top prosecutor is a busy, busy man as usual, and we'd like to thank him for taking some time out of his schedule. I don't get to read your name much in the newspapers, but I got to read it last week. And this was after there was an effort to get a petition together by some people for a ballot measure next spring, really a referendum on the refugee resettlement program. Your role is constitutionally in the state of Idaho that you review these things, and then you make a judgment on whether they'll fly or not. I think in the vernacular, and you rejected it because you said you thought there were some constitutional issues here that wouldn't pass muster. Now, my interpretation of that was it wasn't as if I had your entire decision in front of me, but was that a lot of these programs have been agreed to or put in place by people who we elected, so therefore we've given them the plenary power, right? And so they have that, and that this would usurp that. Am I right in saying that that was what your decision was about?
Sort of. Let me go back just a little bit. I don't have. You're right that the law requires that the prosecutor review for constitutional and legal issues any petition that is circulating that might go on the ballot as an initiative. And we don't have the right to say yes or no on it. I can't veto it. I can't say this is unconstitutional, so you can't go forward with it. What we're required to do is to issue a review letter to the people who have written the initiative language, saying if we find any parts of it to be unconstitutional, illegal, or problematic. The people that are running the petition then can either accept those changes and modify their petition, or they can reject them and just go with whatever they choose to go with. And there isn't any provision that allows a single elected prosecutor to, veto the public's right to seek, ordinances through initiative process. So it's not quite as, strict as you made it sound. I don't really get to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down on it. The review letter which we issued from my office found a lot of problems with this proposed initiative, but those problems can be either addressed or ignored by the people that are circulating the initiative. And mine is not the final word on that either. I give an analysis based on research and based on experience, but obviously I'm not a court, so I don't get to decide ultimately whether this is constitutional or not. That would be something that if the initiative passes and if somebody tries to enforce it, I'm sure the people that it's enforced against would say, wait a minute, this is unconstitutional and illegal, and there are 5 or 6 complaints we have, and then it would go to a court which would decide that.
Now, when you made the ruling, and that might not be the right word either, but when you reviewed it, and you essentially said, though, someone could rewrite it and it might be acceptable if it was written the right way?
Really, it's hard, in my view, to rewrite this and make it acceptable. And this will go back to the second part of your first question. The problem with it, well, there are 2 main problems. One is a U.S. constitutional problem, another is an Idaho law problem. The U.S. Constitution problem is, of course, the bigger one, and that is the United States Constitution reserves certain powers to the federal government, right, in the Constitution itself. And I'm not talking about, activist judges, on the court interpreting the Constitution in a liberal way. I'm talking about the actual words that the framers wrote originally, reserves certain things to the federal government. And one of those things is what they call setting up a rule of naturalization. And what that means in terms of this document is this document has to do with refugee resettlement. Refugee resettlement is part of immigration. Immigration is part of naturalization. So it's a subset of the power that's reserved to the federal government under the Constitution. And many of your listeners may have heard of the Supremacy Clause, which is also part of the actual Constitution. And that says that when the federal government legislates in an area that is reserved to the federal government, that law is supreme and cannot be undone by the states or by local governments. And in fact, it's through interpretation over the years, it's not just that it can't be undone. The local governments and state governments cannot even legislate in that arena. So if there's an area that's wholly set aside for federal legislation, then the state governments can't even propose and pass legislation in that arena. And that's the problem here. The proposed initiative proposes to legislate in an arena that's been reserved for federal action. And then the state law question has to do with the really the enforcement part of this initiative, and that is telling county commissioners that they can't challenge the law, that they can't overturn the ordinance, and in fact imposing criminal penalties on them if they do. According to the proposed initiative, if a county commissioner attempts to undo this initiative with county legislation through the normal course of events, then they would lose their job, go to jail, and pay fines. So that can't be done because I think it's probably universal in all governments in this country, a rule that one legislature cannot tell a future legislature what they can and can't do. Obviously, that would usurp your right and your ability to elect representatives if the 1999 legislature could say to the 2000 legislature, hey, you can't undo anything we've done. We're protected here. You can't undo it. You might as well not even be elected. The rule is that any subsequent legislature can review legislative acts by a prior legislature, and the initiative process in this state puts the people as essentially a legislature. It allows them to propose and pass laws, but those laws are subject to change and alteration by the succeeding legislative body. And since this would be a county ordinance, the legislative body here is the county commissioners. So you can't tell next year's county commissioners that they can't undo this year's statutes. So those are the two big problems with it from a legal point of view. And I don't take a position, on the substantive issue necessarily. I mean, I think that there are good points on both sides here. On the one side, you have all these poor people who are going through hell in these awful countries, and they're looking for refuge, and they look to us and other countries for that refuge, and you can't help but have sympathy for that. And on the other hand, that really bad people are going to take advantage of any generosity that we show by trying to smuggle in bad people. So there are legitimate issues on both sides of that complex issue. But I'm not required or asking to be involved in that giant decision. The question is whether this is a legal way to attack it.
Could they put together something, though, that just as a referendum that would be a symbolic, like a poll, just to get a head count? I mean, a reflection of the population.
Sure, and that's done by legislatures, by the Republican Party does that, the Twin Falls commissioners do that, pass a resolution, for instance. You could pass a resolution saying it is the stated position of Twin Falls County that, either we don't want a refugee center or we want more refugee centers, or if you put any refugees here, we want them vetted for national security. You could pass a resolution that essentially states the opinion of the people of Twin Falls County. And states and localities do that all the time.
A polling company could do the same thing, though, obviously, as well.
Oh, sure. I mean, you could have something informal like a poll that shows what we feel about that, and that there are polls all the time, not down to the county level, because there's no polling company that polls Twin Falls County, and obviously you'd have to pay to do that. But the national polls and there are statewide polls, they don't have any official effect. And really, a resolution doesn't either, but a resolution is an official statement of what our view is. And that, if this was just a resolution saying, we hereby resolve that we're against refugee centers being located in Twin Falls or having Sharia law or whatever, you can do that.
Want to point out Grant Loebs is our guest in studio this hour of the program. He's the Twin Falls County Prosecutor. And you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Top story with Bill Colley on this Tuesday morning. If you have a question or comment for the prosecutor as well, you can give us a telephone call at 736-0300. We are going to talk a little bit of law enforcement, too, as well this morning. I'd like to point that out because there is a running count now on the number of law enforcers who've been killed in this country this year, and I think it's up to 25, which may not necessarily be setting any records, but a lot of these things have been happening with more frequency in recent weeks, and we're going to mention a couple of things about that too as well before we conclude the program today. Before we go to the break, we've got about 2 minutes before that. There was a story, a column in the Wall Street Journal yesterday that I read, and the writer is saying that what we're seeing now going on the roads recently with the treatment of law enforcement is really more of an overall breakdown of the whole notion of a respect for law in this country. Do you see that? Would you agree with that?
Well, I see it the same way you do in reading and watching TV, but I don't see it in Twin Falls. It's possible, and I haven't spoken with a lot of the officers who are out on the road, whether they are starting to see it in smaller ways. But we certainly don't see what we're seeing in Baltimore or Chicago or any of these places where there's just open disrespect to the rule of law. I think, as in many things, some good trends, some bad trends, they come to Idaho last. And sometimes we're behind the curve enough that we can outlast a bad trend, and I'm hoping that's the case. But it's quite disturbing to see what's going on around the country.
This was actually a paragraph from a Washington Post story today on the shooting of the trooper in Kentucky, and this is the quote. His name was Ponder, by the way. This is the quote. Ponder discovered that Johnson Shank's license was suspended and learned that the two female passengers didn't have licenses. He then tried to find the group a hotel room so someone else could come and drive them. That's the quote from the story. And so this was a law enforcer who was going out of his way to try and help these people, and he ends up dead Sunday night after making those efforts. And I think that if you're looking for something that tells you about a lack of respect, when someone is actually looking out for you and you still end up killing them, we've got a serious issue in some parts of the country. 9:20, we've got a short break coming up. More with Grant Loebs. He's our Twin Falls County Prosecutor. He's in studio with us for most of the hour today. It's 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Our studio guest is Grant Loebs. He's the County Prosecutor in Twin Falls County, Idaho. Joining us in studio, he does this on a monthly basis and also takes some of your telephone calls as well. Coming up on 923-54, Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story. Our telephone number 736-0300. I was just starting to share a story with him while we were off air. One of my former co-workers, a fellow by the name of Doug Beatty. Doug was a housing police officer in Washington, D.C. for a time in the 1980s, and then later was running security at Union Station in Washington, which he said was probably a little easier, although he used to find people living up in the rafters who some of them had made homes there and for many, many months, but they generally weren't the dangerous folks. And yet he has told me in the past that he's a little skeptical sometimes of police, but he made a comment to me last night that if someone is throwing a brick at you and you're a police officer, you might want to take action, and that might include actually shooting that person because that brick could be deadly. Now, this is the one thing I think from the your background, you would probably understand this, that the public doesn't necessarily understand that the police officer can protect himself, and it's not just he doesn't have to find a brick and throw it back. It's not about equal force. It's about getting you to stop, and sometimes that may require someone to use a service weapon.
Right. And, my experience in Twin Falls is obviously colored by what happens here. I see things in other parts of the state, and I see things around the country. And of course, an example which occurs where a policeman does something inappropriate is rightfully publicized. If a policeman shoots somebody who shouldn't be shot, if a policeman uses excessive force on somebody, that's going to be publicized, and rightly so. My experience in Twin Falls has been kind of the opposite in that I find policemen who probably certainly legally could defend themselves with deadly force and maybe sometimes should defend themselves with deadly force who take risks, um, so as to not use deadly force and put themselves in danger, probably more danger than they should. I mean, I've had policemen who've been attacked by a person with a knife and haven't shot them, and certainly could, because um, police know through their training that a person with a knife can kill you very quickly from a surprisingly great distance away before you can react and stop it. But my experience in Twin Falls has been that the police here are go out of their way to not use deadly force, to give the person the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they're disturbed, maybe they're, have a mental disorder, maybe they're just drunk or angry or something, and it'll pass. But, I think that the more attacks there are on police, the more police are going to start to worry about the actual danger to themselves. And I think it just breeds bad behavior on both sides eventually. So this is a really disturbing trend, this violence against police throughout the country.
In the Wall Street Journal piece yesterday, the writer talked to several law enforcers around the country. One was saying that he was trying to get someone out of a vehicle that had overturned. And so this is, he's down on the ground and he's trying to get a door open that's been damaged when someone showed up and stuck a cell phone camera in his face and tried to goad him into a fight. And there was a case not long ago. Friends of mine from Delaware sent me video of this, where a man on a street not far from the state capitol was shot, not killed. I mean, in fact, as it turned out, he recovered quite quickly, but he was shot by police officers after he essentially decided to pull out a pistol himself. They weren't going to take any chances. But what happened following that is the police were trying to bring him to a car. A mob showed up, and the mob was, engulfed the police department, screaming and yelling. And the thing is, you're worried that someone's going to actually try to grab somebody's, service pistol in that situation. And I don't know how police can work in that environment. It used to be that they would try to clear people out of the way, but apparently there's so much concern now that they'll be criticized for that they were definitely 6 police officers surrounded by 100 people, definitely in some serious danger.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you think about what police are required to do as part of their job, they are required to interact with people they've never met before, and have no reason to suspect specifically of being violent. For instance, like the situation where you're helping a person in an overturned car, you have no idea who that person is. You have no idea who a person is who might have run out of gas or might have a flat tire along the side of the road. And maybe it's just you or me or some law-abiding citizen who is in need of trouble, or in need of help because they're in trouble. And so the policeman stops to try to help that person. Well, if that person knows what the policeman doesn't know, that they're wanted for armed robbery for, knocking over a liquor store 2 hours ago, they are all amped up and they're all ready to fight when the policeman's just thinking, here's a guy who has a flat tire. That's kind of what happened in Ferguson. I mean, I don't know how much the officer knew, but Mr. Brown clearly knew he'd just robbed this, convenience store. So he was ready for a confrontation before the policeman was, I think. And so that's a problem. And then, of course, police are involved in minor traffic incidents. I'm stopping somebody with an expired plate or with, a turn signal that's out. Again, you have no idea whether that person is going to say, thank you, officer, I didn't notice my turn signal was out, or has a gun on the seat next to them, knowing that they just committed a crime and that they're wanted. And then, it escalates from there. Police are obviously investigating the actual crime, looking for felons, engaged in a high-speed chase. In those cases, the policeman always knows this is a situation that could get ugly fast. And they ought to know that about every other thing. But, I think that their mentality is, I'm out here to help people in addition to catch bad guys. So they can get caught by surprise.
We've got more with Grant Loebs coming up on Top Story. along with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 54 at 9:30. And, of course, you can call us if you have a question or comment for the prosecutor, 736-0300. Write that down or commit it to memory. Wanted to mention, if we could, during this segment of the program, before we continue with Grant Loebs on the air, we may be into some cooler weather now, and it's probably going to be a while before we really see the hot weather again. However, we still recommend that you give the folks at Tint Lady a call, because window tints can actually help prevent the fading of your furniture, your drapes, your carpet. And you can also, as we say during the summertime, keep the home cool. We do want to point out they will do a free estimate. All you have to do is give them a telephone call, and they'll do this for your home or your office, even your automobile. The telephone number is 736-8469. You can find Tint Lady online at tintladyidaho.com. Now, locally owned and operated, in excess of 20 years experience, 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls, open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Saturday by appointment only. And remember, don't squint, get tint. Having a conversation with the prosecutor off air, we were talking about cell phone cameras, and these things have become, I guess, the word is, a big word is ubiquitous. They're everywhere, that people have them. And we were talking about the police officer who was at an accident scene and someone putting a cell phone camera in his face.
Trying to incite him to do something newsworthy.
And people love celebrity, even if it's that old quote, 15 minutes of it. They're looking for it, and this is what we're dealing with.
Well, the cell phone gives everybody the opportunity to be the star of their own mini TV show, because if you do something or catch something on video that is interesting, that some news station is going to put it on the air, maybe even nationally. And so if you can, take a picture of yourself getting thumped by a policeman, you're going to get on TV. If you can get a policeman to thump you and you take a picture of it, there you go. And that sounds like what the guy that you described was trying to do. And I think there's a little bit more of an exhibitionist streak in people that's been brought out by these cell phones. You see people posting these selfies all over. I mean, our president takes selfies of himself. I mean, I didn't even know what a selfie was till my daughter told me, and I thought, well, why would you want to do that? I mean, the least interesting thing about any picture I take is if I'm in it. But that seems to not be the case with a lot of people, and I think the cell phone video, you're directing and starring in your own TV show, and police have these things put in their face all the time, and so do other public figures. I mean, we've all seen these things where some, candidate or some public official's making a speech, and he's asked a question, and it's on a little shaky video later that night on TV. So I think that's part of what's going on with some of these things. I think some of these people wouldn't do what they're doing if they didn't know they were on TV.
Well, and we get back to that story. We talked about this a couple of months ago in South Carolina, where a police officer shot on video. You see a police officer shooting and bringing down a suspect who appears to be running away. The video, though, itself, the quality was shaky. It was terrible. The thing is, in a lot of these videos, you don't know what happened in the 20 seconds or 20 minutes before that video started. Right. And so if a police officer is seen decking someone, if that person had just been spitting on the police officer or taking a swipe at him, but that's not on camera, we don't obviously get that impression.
Well, like any evidence that's collected, you have to consider everything in context, and sometimes the context is obvious and sometimes it's not. That video, which, and there are some videos that you say, well, thank goodness we had that, or we wouldn't know what had happened. And that might fall in that category. I mean, that South Carolina shooting, for somebody who just watched the video and watched some news stories about what had happened, that doesn't look like a very good shoot to me. But sometimes you don't really know what is going on, and then suddenly you just have a little snippet of it that's caught on video. And this is, the one of the problems I see with this move in the country towards these body cams worn by policemen. The policeman's body cam isn't going to get everything either. And I think people have an elevated expectation that if a policeman's got a camera on his body somewhere, whether it's on his head or on his chest, that they're going to kind of see everything he saw, and they're going to understand everything he did, and they're going to be able to dissect it and criticize it. The problem is that there's no guarantee that at any given time a camera that's on your head or on your chest is getting the relevant view. And so it isn't going to be the panacea that people are thinking where, hey, we don't even really need a policeman to testify. We just need to watch this video. You know, we're not going to get to that stage. I mean, your video is only good as the person taking it and as good as the view that that person had. So, as I said, there are many problems with the body camera movement, but it isn't going to solve the problems everybody thinks it's going to solve.
In fact, well, I've got a question. Well, we've got one more segment ahead. I've got a question for the prosecutor about um, the evidence, how you can actually can you use cell phone video as evidence, or perhaps even could you have evidence that comes in or proposed as evidence from a body cam that may actually not be admissible in court? That's on the way in just a couple of minutes. It's 20 minutes now from 10 o'clock. Grant Loebs joining us in studio this morning. Bill Colley as well with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story. Our studio guest is Grant Loebs. Of course, he's the top prosecutor in Twin Falls County. Joins us on, is it the third Tuesday? Is that what we call it, the third
Yes.
Tuesday of every month?
Yep.
And since we had a Tuesday on the 1st, it kind of came along in the middle of the month today. Joining us today, we've been talking about a couple of different issues. If you've got just a question or comment for him, we're down to maybe about 4 or 5 minutes. 736-0300. A question that I got thinking of when you were talking about body cameras for police officers, but also people in the public who are taking pictures with a cell phone camera, videos and the like when they see something. A lot of that stuff would never make it into a courtroom as evidence, would it?
Well, it depends. I mean, a lot of it probably would. The standard for evidence is photographic and video evidence is, does it accurately portray the incident which it purports to show? And if you have a person who can say of a video or of a photograph, yes, that's the way it looked at the time, that's the way it was when I saw it, then it usually comes into evidence. It doesn't require that you even be the person who took the photograph. But if somebody brings a photograph of somebody committing a crime, or something that shows identity, for instance, from a convenience store video or something, and I can show that to somebody who says, yep, that's the way the guy looked when I saw him, that's what happened as I remember it, they can authenticate the photograph or the video by testifying that it is an accurate portrayal. So it usually comes in. The question with these videos, like body cam videos, um, and sometimes videos that people take, is how much do you show to accurately portray the context? And if I have a video and I want to show 2 seconds of it, but I don't want to show the other 5 minutes that are on either side of it, I'll probably be required to show the whole thing, in order to get completeness. And so, because we know if we take one snapshot of it, that can be deceptive. And that's part of the problem again with the body cams, is where do you start and where do you stop? Because some agencies have proposed rules that, well, the policeman just turns it on when he's in a situation he thinks needs to be recorded. Well, that by its nature makes it kind of a selective evidence gathering tool. And then there are some places where they insist, no, you got to keep it on all the time. You got to turn it on at the beginning of your shift and turn it off at the end. And obviously, at that point, you're gathering an enormous amount of data that needs to be stored, collated, analyzed, watched, redacted, and turned over to defense attorneys if there's a crime.
And that would be the thing. You might have to sit through court and watch every police officer in Twin Falls going through the drive-through at McDonald's.
Well,
That.
it probably wouldn't be something you'd have to show in court, but somebody at the police station is going to have to watch every minute of it. Then they're going to give it to me, and I'm going to have to watch every minute of it. Then I'm going to have to give it to the defense attorney, and he's going to have to watch every minute of it, because you don't know whether there's something important that happens at minute 36, even though the crime actually happened, an hour later. So it's going to be an enormous, enormous suck of manpower and time and storage capacity. And well, I'm anxious or terrified. I don't know which is the right word, to see how it works.
But in our local community, and when it happened in Meridian, I thought, well, okay, it'll be 6 or 8 months before some other cities consider this because they'll want to see what the experience is. But it wasn't long after that that in Twin Falls it was adopted as well. So it seems to be people are just they're going ahead with it, and I don't know, have they considered all of those questions?
I think they're starting to consider them. We haven't had any agency that I'm aware of that has really answered all these questions, even some of the ones that are going forward with it. Twin Falls has given a notice that they're going to go forward with it, but they haven't yet implemented it. I think in part because they're trying to answer these questions and start with a finished product rather than make changes every 2 months or 2 days after they implement it. But some of these problems I think are very difficult to answer. When do you turn it off? When do you turn it on? If I knock at your house and you're a rape victim and you're traumatized and you're bleeding, and your head's bashed and your children are running around, do I photograph you or do I not? And if I turn it off, what's the defense going to say about what happened during the black time? Um, do I turn it on at the beginning of my shift and record going through the drive-through at McDonald's? Well, probably you shouldn't, but if you don't, when did you turn it back on? And then, how long do you keep the video? It's evidence. It's gathered by the state of Idaho. It's pretty hard to argue that you ever can get rid of it. So, you know, there are proposals to get rid of it after 200 days or after so many months, but then some policeman or prosecutor is making a decision to destroy that evidence. And what if that's evidence that a defendant needs later on and we've gathered it and then destroyed it? It's a big problem.
Got about a minute left. Have you been consulted by any of these governments?
Locally, sure. Locally, our police department is good at consulting the people who are players in the system to get their input. So yeah, they've come in. I've spoken with the police department about it, and I've told them some of the problems I see, and I think they're trying to wrestle with with the issue.
And again, I think the council will take into consideration police department, your office, and all of these other inputs that they're getting.
They should. I mean, the police who've come and talked to me about it are certainly listening and understand the issue. Whether that means that they'll solve the issue before they implement the system, I don't know. Some of these are going to be really difficult to solve.
I want to thank Grant Loebs for coming by today and joining us in the studio.
Thank you.
Offering some thoughts on, especially some law enforcement thoughts today. We do want to point out Mike Gallagher coming up next, brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563.